During Pierre Trudeau's time served as Prime Minister, the Official Languages Act was passed by Parliament. Because of this act, Canada became a bilingual country. Many people were forced to speak French and therefore took courses. By 1976, over $500 million was spent on the courses alone. Although some people were opposed to the act was never revoked, and it just came to be accepted by Canada. Therefore, Canada has been an English French-speaking country ever since. In 1970, Trudeau proposed to increase family allowances for poor citizens as he wanted to share national wealth more equally. Trudeau had promised a just society. By 1971, because of him, a new plan was introduced to extend unemployment payments to all employees, increase benefit payments, and cover long-term illnesses and pregnancy. By 1971, unemployment had increased to 6.2%, with inflation at around 4%. The Canadian economy was experiencing the worst of both problems, rising unemployment and rising prices, a situation that came to be called stagflation. Pierre Trudeau and his Liberal government paid the price for these economic problems in the 1972 federal election. They lost their majority government and were forced to form a minority government with the NDP. By 1973, Arab countries had become convinced that they were being paid too little for oil. They created the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, the OPEC, to raise oil prices. The result of this, however, was a 10% increase in inflation in Canada in 1974. Trudeau had a plan to decrease the inflation from the oil prices. With this plan, he called for another election and the Liberals were once again in power. However, the plan failed as inflation did not decrease but continued to increase even more throughout the 70s. Around this time, Canadians also became concerned about the increasingly high degree of American economic investment in Canada. The government therefore created Petro-Canada in 1973 to give the country a large publicly owned oil company and an industry dominated by American companies. In 1974, the government also created the Foreign Investment Review Agency, which was known as FIRA. Its purpose was to review any proposed takeover of a Canadian firm by a foreign business. Inflation, unemployment, and rising oil prices continued to damage the Canadian economy throughout the 1970s. A new economic challenge that began was the rise of federal deficit, which is the result when a government's spending exceeds its revenues. From 1976 to 1984, Canada also experienced differences in language, ethnicity, region, and economic wealth, which led to tension. Workers in the Maritimes moved to get better job opportunities in the forestry, oil and gas, and construction industries in central and western Canada. Traditional jobs in fishing, farming, and coal production had declined. People in the Maritimes were struggling economically and received government aid. Many Quebecers were also beginning to move from rural areas to cities and were becoming more interested in political and cultural debates than in religion. Canada was now an urban society with the majority of Canadians living in cities and surrounding suburbs. People from around the world like China, Japan, India, Pakistan, and the West Indies were leaving to immigrate to Canada. Of all Canadians, 24% were from European nations and only 28% could claim French ancestry. Canada had officially become a multicultural nation with a bilingual structure. In the 1970s, what was known as the October Crisis had occurred. On October 5, 1970, the Front de Libération du Québec, known as the FLQ, kidnapped James Cross, a British trade commissioner. They also committed many violent acts and by 1970 had killed 6 people. As a result of this, the War Measures Act was created by Justin Trudeau. Because of this act, police officers had found James Cross and brought him home safely, and this had ceased terrorism in Quebec. Cold War hostilities between the United States and the Soviet Union was the focus of global news. Canada was involved in several ways in developing the nuclear capabilities of other countries. In 1976, Canada signed an agreement with South Korea that allowed the sale of a $700 million CANDU nuclear reactor. They also continued to export plutonium to the United States that was used for nuclear weapons. In 1979, Canadians came to the aid of the United States during a difficult time of international crisis. A revolution in Iran had led to the removal of the dictator. Iran had become an Islamic republic. Young supporters of the new republic shocked the international community by storming into the American embassy and holding employees as hostages. The Americans were spirited out of Iran using Canadian passports, which was a plan organized by the Canadian ambassador to Iran, Ken Taylor. Ken Taylor became a celebrity and a symbol of Canadian humanity for this. The 1970s was also a time for major technological advancement. The different technologies developed in the 1970s opened a whole new avenue in different fields, such as computers, space technology, and automobiles, etc. The first microprocessor was developed in the 1970s. Microprocessors contained all the main components of a computer on a single chip. Childproof bottles, pocket calculators, word processors, floppy disks, genetic engineering, and CAT scans were also invented in the 1970s. The first test tube babies were born in 1978. The neutron bomb, a new weapon of mass destruction, was also developed, further threatening the survival of all species. Canada also launched a $60 million communication technology satellite at Cape Kennedy, Florida in 1976. Other inventions include the cassette tape, microwave oven, first digital camera, and the first black box playback, which was a mechanism to record flight information, and this system was established at the Ottawa Airport in Canada. American television programs, movies, and cartoons greatly influenced Canadian culture at that time. The most popular television shows of the time were Charlie's Angels, Mork and Mindy, MASH, Bionic Woman, The $6 Million Men, Schoolhouse Rock, Scooby-Doo, and Peanuts. The fashion of the 1970s had a lot to do with the hippie and disco counterculture. Popular fashion trends included satin jackets, leisure suits, mood rings, flare jeans, bared midriffs, chunky shoes, afros, shag hairstyles, midi skirts, tank tops, denim jeans, and tie-dye shirts. 1970s music consisted of funk, soul, R&B, pop, hard and soft rock, and disco. Big artists during that time ranged from David Bowie to Pink Floyd to Aerosmith to Stevie Wonder to Elton John to Bee Gees, etc. The 1970s was one of the most interesting and advancing decades for Canadian history.